John Carrington for Eye on Baltimore. So don't touch that dial. Eye on Baltimore has some good information for you. You're going to have a great time. Don't change that channel. We'll be right back. Hello, welcome back to Eye on Baltimore. I'm John Carrington, and we're here with Mr. Courtney Wilson, who is the Executive Director of the B&O Train Museum. Mr. Wilson, how did you land where you are now?
Well, it's an interesting story, John. I spent many years actually designing museum exhibits, running my own company, and as a result of designing an exhibit here for the B&O Railroad Museum, I landed a job as the curator, and then in the year 2000 I became the director, so I've been here about 15 years, and it's been a terrific experience for me.
All right, I noticed you're wearing a Ravens tie there. You must be a fan of training.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. I'm a big fan of the Ravens.
All right, what's the future of trains in America? We know what the future of the Ravens is, but what's the future of trains in America?
Well, you know, I think that the American public really ought to demand more from the federal government and the state governments as far as rail transportation is concerned. It is the easiest, least expensive way to move people and goods in this great nation of ours. Mm-hmm. And you know, you talk about a carbon footprint with many automobiles and trucks on the road. You know, the railroad can move a tremendous amount of weight for very little fuel across broad expanses of the country, and I really think it's the future of transportation.
Okay, what can our viewers do to enhance that future?
Well, I think a little bit is learn about the ecology of railroading and how a green transportation system it really is. Mm-hmm. And I mean, look, I mean, who would want to drive to New York from Baltimore or Washington nowadays when you can hop on Amtrak, be there in 2 hours and 15 minutes, and you know, they can haul 800 people at a time for, again, very little cost and very efficiently, and put you in a downtown area, directly into a downtown area, which of course there's no security, you don't have to take off your shoes to get on the train, so it's a lot easier as far as passenger travel is concerned as well. So I think learning more about the future of railroading, and then of course anybody should advocate with their local delegation and the congressional delegation to promote more funding towards it.
Learning, that's a very important part of what you want to do here at the museum. Talk about your hours and how people can find the museum.
Sure, and I will say to everyone that we are an educational institution. So we have a dual mission, John, and to our viewers out there. Half of our mission is about preservation, and that is preserving the physical legacy of American railroading here. And then the other is education. And we actually have a very vibrant early childhood education program here that is aimed towards kids 2 to 6 years old. It's an award-winning program and is funded by many, many foundations and corporations because, you know, kids love trains. Mm-hmm. It's just genetic when they're born, I think, that they like trains. And so we have an opportunity when we can capture their interest at that age to teach them the basic life learning skills like shapes and word recognition and colors and things like that. And what a more vibrant place to do that than inside this magnificent museum where they can interact with big trains, little trains, and all kinds of artifacts and interesting pieces of art in between. So education is key to our mission, no doubt.
All right, and of course the name of the museum, the B&O, that's Baltimore and Ohio Railroad.
Yes.
Explain how that came about.
Well, the B&O Railroad was America's first commercial railroad. And actually, most people think it was named after Baltimore and the state of Ohio, but the reality was it was named after Baltimore and the Ohio River, because that was its first destination. Maryland has the most inland port on the East Coast, And so the distance between the Port of Baltimore out to the Ohio River, in the early days, this was the shortest distance. And when the Erie Canal opened up in New York in 1827, it threatened the Port of Baltimore in a big way, because all that traffic from the breadbasket of America would go up through New York and not come down to Baltimore. So a bunch of businessmen in Baltimore created what I call a spectacular gamble on this new technology. And they created this railroad that would follow the river valleys and go up through the mountains out to the Ohio River to capture those goods and bring them to the Port of Baltimore. So it was pretty amazing.
This is wonderful. Now, how can people go online and find this information, search out these facts that are being lost?
You know, we have one of the richest websites, I think, as far as railroad is concerned, on the web. Our address is www.borail.org. And you will find not only information about the history of railroading in America, but you can also take a look online at our collection. We have the world's most famous and largest and most comprehensive railroad collection in the entire United States, and we're the largest nonprofit railroad museum in the world.
Let's take a look at some of it. Let's take a look at this.
Hello, I'm Michael Gross, the host of the B&O Railroad Museum Television Network. You know, the hobby of miniature model trains electrifies the child in all of us, including myself. The B&O's Public Relations Department recognized that early, and that the railroad's role in history was significant. Maintaining public awareness, especially for kids and families, was just as important. Now, this led to the creation of a set of traveling model railroads that served as ambassadors of a sort for the B&O. Now, we are today inside the B&O Railroad Museum's Hayes T. Watkins Library, and behind me in this case is a set of one of those traveling model railroads. This traveled each holiday season along the B&O system to various points and was exhibited at various public locations. It was commissioned by the B&O and manufactured by the A.C. Gilbert Company, who made American Flyer electric trains as well as the ever popular Erector set.
In 1936, the B&O constructed a portable O-gauge layout at its Montclair shops in Baltimore that weighed about 14,000 pounds with 36 sections. Valued at nearly $50,000, this traveling model exhibit measuring 50 feet long and 25 feet wide would appear periodically in communities across the B&O railroad system and was recognized as one of the finest ever constructed. During World War II, the layout was exhibited in Army and Veterans hospitals and served as an educating tool and focal point for stimulating sales of war bonds and stamps in the civilian sector. After World War II, in which now defunct Baltimore-based department store was B&O's model train layout displayed.
Wow, that is so exciting. My goodness. Jobs. That's what they're talking about in Washington, D.C. Where can railroads impact jobs?
Well, gosh, it's a huge industry today, and I think kids coming out of college, particularly those in the IT field and other modern fields, don't realize what a vibrant industry that railroading still is. You know, it's kind of an invisible industry to a certain degree. I call it like the plumbing in your house. Nobody notices it until it breaks. But the reality is that railroads are carrying more freight and passengers today than they ever have in the history of the United States. And so the job market with these major railroads, and there's 7 huge major railroads in the United States, and then 450 smaller railroads in the United States. The job market there, even for people on the cutting edge of technology, is there because these are major corporations that are hiring, even as we speak.
Well, I know during my grandparents' era, the job on the railroad as a porter was one of the prime jobs to get. You got to travel, you had all the perks, and you had all the opportunity to advance yourself. And many times, when people wanted to be a porter, they had to have an education open above just high school, and it meant that it was an open door.
We do a lot of the history of the African American on the railroad, and the principal jobs were porter, waiter, chef, and so when you think about the fabulous cuisine that was on the railroad dining cars, you know, it was the African Americans that created that cuisine, cooked that cuisine, and you're right. Was such a key employment, and I know in the African American community that we're kind of the kingpins of society. Even though it was really hard, rough work where you're away from home for weeks at a time as well.
You're in a competition. There's an industry out there to move people. What is your relationship to the others who are competing with transporting people and packages and goods?
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, there are some cases where railroading is the obvious answer, and that's a niche market. Moving freight, for instance. I mean, you can't move box loads of and box cars full of furniture and goods and electronics across the country any less expensively or any more efficiently by any other means of transportation. That's it. That's the niche market. As far as moving people, in many cases, it's a matter of convenience. Trains still run from Washington, D.C. to Chicago, but it's an overnight trip. So even though it's a bit of a hassle to get up, go park at the airport, get in the terminal, go through security, get on the airplane, and your 2-hour flight may end up costing you 5 hours, the reality is it's still more efficient as far as moving people than a train is. Except when we were talking about like from between Baltimore and D.C., Baltimore and Philadelphia, Baltimore and New York, and these major rail corridors, it is so much less expensive, so much easier to get yourself from point A to B. It's the long distance travel on trains which I think takes a hit to the airlines.
Probably my most romantic view of the railroad was moving people in the movie Murder on the Orient Express. I mean, that was one grand train, and it was beautiful. The food was perfect. Describe what a railroad ride is in this era.
Well, it's a bit differently. I mean, you're about my age, John. You probably remember the days when you actually got silverware on an airline
That's
flight.
Right, I remember that.
And were fed a hot meal. Well, now you get a bag of peanuts, if you're lucky. So I will say that in the first class compartment of Amtrak's Acela, they do a reasonably good job of serving you a hot meal with real silverware still today. Okay. But it's not like the days that we talked about before, with the African American chefs in the kitchen and the perfectly groomed waiters serving you on a white tablecloth with a real china and real homemade food that was made on the train as you were moving.
Oh my goodness! So I can't go to Penn Station and expect that kind of service.
I doubt it.
Oh my goodness! All right, now, what has been your highlight of your career so far with the B&O Museum?
You know, this museum suffered a tragic roof collapse back in 2003 under the weight of a snowstorm, and most Baltimoreans, if you were living here then, or even if you lived in the region, you remember the awful pictures. That was about a $30 million disaster in the course of one snowy night. And I will say that the highlight of my career was working with this staff and working with our board of directors to rebuild and reopen this museum, which we thought was dead forever, in 22 months. Okay. And the help and the money that came in from all over the world, from the state of Maryland, the federal government, to help us do that rebuilding project was just phenomenal. And we're coming up actually on the 10th anniversary of that in February of 2013. And so I would say that recovering from that roof collapse certainly was the highlight of my life in many ways. And in fact, I kind of define my life pre-roof collapse or post-roof collapse. But it's been an emotional ride, and most of the staff that works with us here at the museum have been with me for way more than 10 years. And so we've been able to retain them, because when you go through a disaster like that, I think you automatically become emotionally attached to what you do.
Right. Well, give us an idea of what other red letter dates are coming up for the museum. You mentioned the anniversary of the rebuild.
Sure.
Okay. I know you did something for Christmas.
Yes, we have a huge thing, and that's every year. We have an annual holiday festival of trains and toys. It's 60,000 people come in the month of December to see this fabulous thing. That's just over now. But coming up in 2013, in April, we'll be reopening a new edition of our exhibit, The War Came by Train, which is about the railroad in the American Civil War, celebrating the 150th anniversary. In addition to that, in the fall, we have our steam days, where we actually drag our steam engines out and run them in downtown Baltimore. That's always a lot of fun. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention a day out with Thomas. Thomas the Tank Engine is a wonderful child star, and the real Thomas will be here at the B&O the last weekend in April and the first weekend in May of 2013. It is about 30,000 people in 6 days, and the tickets can be ordered online. But that, as far as kids are concerned, I mean, it's one of the largest literary-based events on the East Coast.
Okay. What can our viewers do to help you?
Well, I think getting involved in the museum is important. I mean, we have a legacy of preservation here. We have a huge mission of education. So if you have some time on your hands and would like to be a volunteer, please give us a call. If you have a little spare change in your pocket. And I will tell your viewers, and you, John, that this is a museum that receives no money from the city or the state of Maryland, or the federal government for operations. Our $3.5 million budget is solely private donations, earned income from admissions and gift shop sales, things like that. And then the many gracious corporations and foundations throughout the region that choose to support our mission.
All right, well, let's give a shout out to those people who collect trains. I know there's a bunch of them out there. What do you say to those hobbyists?
We have some great model railroading stuff around here, too. We have many gauges on display, and this year coming up, we're actually talking about working with kids to rekindle that hobby in younger folks by doing a series of classes on how to build a model railroad in your own.
Yeah, look, Mr. Wilson, I'm a grandparent, okay, and every now and then my grandchildren will say something crazy like, let's go to Hawaii, and well, I can't afford that, but I certainly could afford something dealing with the B&O Museum. What do you say to grandparents who need to give their grandkids a memorable experience that they can relate to and the kids can relate to?
Well, first of all, we said, you know, there's that genetic attraction to trains and kids, so it's a great fit. And for a grandparent to be able to share their experiences, like you did with me a few minutes ago, about railroading when they were a kid, what the golden age was like, and you know, that fascinates kids. They love learning about that. And then they get a chance here at the B&O to actually see the stuff that you're talking about. So I know we have a lot of trains downstairs that are a lot older than the two of us, but just the same, we have a lot of equipment here that we remember as kids or growing up. And so this is really a mecca for grandparents and grandkids. Through our website, you can buy a ticket if you want, but typically you can just show up and come on in. We have lots of opportunities. Most people, when they arrive here, actually make a decision to join the museum. And we offer that opportunity to everybody that buys a admission ticket. And we tell them that before you leave today, if you will buy a membership, which gives you free admission for an entire year along with special programs, then what we do is deduct the cost of admission from the cost of the membership. And so it's a very, very economical deal. And not only do you get the B&O in Baltimore, but our museum on Main Street at 2711 Maryland Avenue in Ellicott City is the oldest railroad station in America. And Mount Clair Museum House in Carroll Park, which is an 1857 colonial mansion, are all included in that membership because we operate all three museums.
Oh my goodness. You know, so many times when we talk history, we always say George Washington slept here or Abraham Lincoln slept there. Name some of the names of people who've been through this facility.
Well, gosh, it's very, very important because one of the first railroad stations in America was placed here. Edgar Allan Poe traveled through here. Franklin Roosevelt traveled through here. Harry Truman did. Go back to the Civil War, Robert E. Lee came through here on his way to Harper's Ferry. So if you look at historical figures, most of them had to get on the B&O. Lincoln took 9 trips on the B&O Railroad during his administration, including his last trip, which was unfortunately his funeral train.
Oh my goodness, oh my goodness. So this is a very, very important part of American history.
Indeed.
If you could go back 10 years and change anything, would you? And if so, what would you change?
Well, I don't think I would change much at all. And, you know, maybe you expected me to say I wish the roof hadn't fell in, but a disaster like that actually turned out to be one of the most important advances for the B&O Railroad Museum, because not only were we able to rebuild a lot of aging infrastructure, John, but it also gave us a new perspective on the 21st century, because there was that moment when we were thinking about rebuilding that we sat down with the board and the staff and said, okay, you have a blank canvas. We have 40 acres, the best collection in the United States of America. If you were going to reinvent a new museum, what would it look like? And we were able, because of the funding we were able to raise, to implement most of those ideas. So when you come to the B&O, I mean, virtually every part of this campus is handicapped accessible now. You get a vibrant educational experience, but most of all, you have fun here.
I love your enthusiasm. Talk about your background. Did you always want to be a museum curator, a museum executive?
I always loved the field of history. There's no doubt about it. I'm just crazy for history. And when I history major in college, got 2 master's degrees in history beyond that, but worked for the National Park Service. You know, I had the big Smokey the Bear hat and worked in the historical parks like Yorktown and Fort McHenry and places like that around the country. And then from that, I sort of put myself in the hands of museums by beginning a company that worked with museums, consulting and building things. So literally being the director of a major American museum like the B&O is really one of the greatest accomplishments of my life, and I love it here. And that's why I think you see a little twinkle in my eyes, because I love coming to work every day.
Did you grow up in Baltimore?
I'm a Baltimorean through and through, absolutely. I've worked across the country at various careers, but the truth of the matter is that this is home.
What part of town?
I grew up just north of Baltimore, and actually in 1956, way back, when I was 3 years old, my dad brought me here for the first time, and I have vague memories of walking into that magnificent roundhouse downstairs that many years ago.
All right, take us on a tour of the museum. We walk in the front door, what do we see?
Well, you have lots of options. First of all, we typically don't give museum tours because this is a huge museum. I said it was almost 40 acres. So we encourage people to explore on their own. We do have some various specific tours that a person can pick up. So if you're interested in steam engines, you can pick up that tour and it will show you exactly where to go. If you're interested in the Civil War, we have a tour for that that'll show you exactly where to go. What we do, though, is run specific programs about interesting things throughout the day. So you get a schedule when you get here, and you know at 11 o'clock there is a program on how a steam engine works over here. And maybe at 1 o'clock there is a tour of our North passenger car shop and the magnificent engines that are out there. I think the Roundhouse is the centerpiece of our museum campus. It is one of the most magnificent pieces of American architecture, as I think you can attest to yourself.
Yeah.
It's a jaw dropper when you walk in, and you can just tour through railroad cars now. When I said we were handicapped accessible, we can get people up and inside of railroad cars in the cab of a steam locomotive. So it's a very, very interactive, tensile experience when you get here. It's not like going into a museum where you're looking at objects through the glass, because this is a place where you can touch and feel and climb and enjoy and just really immerse yourself in the great saga of American railroading.
All right, give us some advice for first-time visitors. High heel shoes or tennis shoes, parking. Give us advice.
Sure. We have a free parking lot here, one of our greatest assets. We can handle 250 cars. So come on down with your car, or if you'd like to, come by public transportation, we're served certainly by the bus and taxi cabs and the light rail and things like that. But I will say that wearing comfortable clothing is important. There are railroads around here. There are railroad tracks to walk across and things like that. So it's important, I think, that you're comfortable when you visit. And because a lot of our exhibits are outside, it's important that you dress for the weather as well. So come warmly dressed in the winter and coolly dressed in the summer. There's a cafe here if you get hungry. And there's opportunities to sit and rest for a little while. while you continue your journey. And I think actually the photographic scenery around here of these great industrial machines is just wonderful as well. And we see a lot of blog posts from visitors that will post their photographs of their wonderful experience here at the B&O on their blog. One of the richest rare book libraries and archives here at the museum of any railroad museum in the United States. So we have more than 500,000 historic photographs, more than 2.5 million documents, and just resources for researchers, people doing genealogy, who might have a relative that worked for the B&O and things like that. So that's another resource that many people don't realize we have.
Oh, this has really been a great Eye on Baltimore. I mean, Courtney Wilson, you've been a wealth of information. I'm excited. I think I'm going to go jump on a train right now. I don't know where it's going to go, but I just have that enthusiasm that you translated to me and our viewers. Do you have any final thoughts?
I just want to invite your viewers to come down and see us. If you've never been here, it's a must destination for Baltimore. And if you have been here, even in the past 5 years, this place changes 2 to 3 to 4 times a year. And we always add something new, or we move things around, or open a new exhibit. So if you think you saw it a year ago, you better come back because there's something new to see.
All right, give us your contact information.
All right, we're here at 901 West Pratt Street, just about 8 blocks west of the Inner Harbor. And our telephone number is 410-752-2490. And again, you can find us on the web at www.borail.org.
Well, this is John Carrington for Eye on Baltimore, and I've had the pleasure of talking to Mr. Courtney Wilson, the Executive Director of the B&O Museum. I just want to thank you for giving us this opportunity to share with you, and thank you for sharing back at us.
You bet.
This is Eye on Baltimore, and we'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.
The B&O layout was displayed at the Hutzler's department store in Baltimore during the 1945 Christmas holiday season. 1 year later, it was exhibited in Cincinnati inside the spacious lobby of the Cincinnati Gas and Electric Company, where about 500,000 people viewed it. By the late 1940s, it became apparent that the popularity of the O-gauge model train layout mandated production of other layouts. HO, S, and new O-scale traveling layouts were designed and constructed by B&O employees at Montclair and traveled throughout Baltimore, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and other major cities throughout the B&O railroad system.
See more operating scale model and toy trains at the B&O's Ellicott City Station Holiday Festival of Trains. A brand new 360-degree multi-level model train layout fills one end of the station. Children particularly love the Thomas the Tank Engine layout. Plan a visit and experience the magic of holiday trains. Happy holidays, and thanks for watching the B&O Railroad Museum Television Network.